it's wonderful to be with you, at least virtually, for your Festival of Solutions and few days of mischief making. I genuinely wish I was with you for this extraordinary event, but I know that at least by connecting this way, we share something in common around our belief in terms of people-powered change. People-powered change to me is a movement, and when I read your literature and look at some of the mischief making that you've been engaged with in the last few years, what I hear is a belief that says that enduring power change happens when it comes from people, from what the Greeks call the demos, which means the common people or the regular people. And I think that's true because it comes from a place of freedom. John McKnight once said that care is the freely given gift of the heart, one person to another. So you can't control it. It doesn't exist in the systems world. It exists in the personal world. It's an exchange between folk, and it's given freely between folk. This idea that community is about freedom is a really important idea, I think. Charlas Peguy once said that tyranny is always much better organised than freedom. Again, I believe that movements like your movement try to redress that imbalance and support the idea that freedom can be better organised than tyranny, and that the real power in that freedom is what endures. So speaking of freedom, it struck me, and I say this with tongue-in-cheek, that as an Irish person, it may be, despite all of the hardship that my forebears may have gone through, that some of them may in fact have been prisoners that were sent from dreary, wet Ireland and the oppression of poverty of the time to serve a prison sentence in Australia. And I know this is slightly tasteless, but it strikes me as somewhat humorous that the luck of the Irish should be that they would be sent by way of punishment for committing crimes to such a fabulous, beautiful country, so full of assets as Australia. Again, it makes me wish I was there. Is it any wonder that I've opted to take the perspective that it is better for us to focus on what's strong than to focus on what's wrong? Asset-based, community-driven development calls on us to shift our focus away from a focus on what's wrong to a focus on what's strong, so that we can use what's strong to address what's wrong and make what's strong stronger. We're absolutely assured by many institutions that the best way to understand people's needs is to analyse them. Well, I'd say the only thing that really needs analysis is needs analysis. The truth of the matter is that the great power in the perspective of ABCD, of asset-based community development, is in recognising that there is an abundance of stuff within us and around us that we need to just simply make visible. ABCD is an act of revelation, an act of taking what is invisible and intentionally making it visible. We're told these days, in times of austerity, that we need to do more with less. Well, I think we need to do more with more. More relationships and mutuality, more cooperatives, more stewardship of our ecologies, more intentional gift exchanges, more focus on being neighbourly, and looking more intentionally for community alternatives to institutional and service-based responses. The fruit of the world belongs to everybody, and the ecology of the world belongs to nobody. So it strikes me that people-powered change is something that is not so much about systems reform, if about systems reform at all. It's about reseeding associational life. It's about focusing beyond the edge of the competency of the institution and asking, what exists outside institutional space? What is it that only communities can do to create a good life? Not just for the people we think are deserving, but also for people who are at the edge, people who've been pushed sometimes to the edge and labelled. One of the people I admire most for his attention to the alternatives of the institutional way and his focus on the community alternatives is Jerome Miller. Jerome was an occupational psychologist, but also a criminologist who took seriously the idea that there are things in community life that can be done to support people who have been labelled and support people who, for whatever reason, have committed crimes. His great story and his great adventure is not just found in how he shut down reformatories in the United States, but also how he enabled communities to come forward with innovative ideas and alternatives to incarceration of young people. One of my favourite stories is a story of how, having honestly told people about the money that was being spent on young people and incarcerating them, how public responded to that, how communities responded to Jerome saying, we're spending $70,000 a year incarcerating and often abusing our young people. What alternatives can you suggest? Well, one of my favourite stories is the story of how many students in universities came forward and suggested to him that he fund them to take somebody who was at that time incarcerated on a round-the-world tour. It was around the time that Pan Am, the American airline, were offering, first airline to do this, were offering round-the-world tickets for $3,000. So it allowed you to travel around the world, and you could get off as few as 3 times or as many as 30, 40 times around the world and spend a year doing that. So many students, when they heard Jerome Miller's invitation to identify community, non-institutional alternatives, came forward with the suggestion that he as a bureaucrat should give them $3,000 for their ticket, another $3,000 to take one of these kids off his hands, and $5,000 spending money. This is by far one of the most successful interventions when it comes to trying to create pro-social behaviour I have ever heard. All of these kids, including the students themselves, experienced transformation. They came back after a year and learned the power of citizenship. And that's the point here, isn't it? That people-powered change is a journey towards citizenship, but also a journey away from being a client. Whether that's a prisoner or somebody who is a client of a service based on their perceived need, whether that again might be mental health related or disability or whatever it might be. The journey towards citizenship is not about having a passport. It's not about having voting rights. It's a journey about being able to come together with other people that you call neighbours and friends, other citizens, to co-create a future that you each find compelling. To take what it is that's within you and around you and connect it into productive action. Another way of talking about that is to describe that act or that activity as the act of community building. And I think community building is the seedbed of democracy. Community building is an art form, and the building blocks of community, what it is that we use to create community, are the seedbed of democracy itself. We use 6 building blocks to build community, and as artists we do this every single time we step into our power. We use the skills, the resources, the gifts of local people, our associations, the below the radar groups, like Men's Sheds, a movement which has sprung up all across Australia. We use institutions that have learned how to organise themselves the way people have organised their lives, and not expect people to organise their lives the way the institutions organised. When we respect the ecology and we steward the ecology, we recognise that it has 30,000 species, not just one, called human beings, that we can collaborate with and cooperate with. And when we learn that our economy is not about money, but about energy and gift exchange, then we grow democracy. Reinhold Niebuhr once said that man's capacity for justice makes democracy possible, but man's inclination to injustice makes democracy necessary. We have to understand that there are things in civic space that only we can do. And as citizens, as free citizens with the gifts to give and the gifts to connect and the gifts to reveal, if we don't do them, they won't get done. There is no Wizard of Oz. There is no yellow brick road. The marketplace will not give us a life of our choosing. When I was a kid growing up in Ireland, we weren't allowed to watch television except for once a year, which was at Christmas time, and my favourite movie was The Wizard of Oz. And you'll remember how Dorothy reached out to the hard-to-reach lion and the scarecrow and the tin man and made the promise that she would bring them on the yellow brick road to the Emerald City, and the wizard would fix their brokenness, would take their deficiencies and make them strong or courageous or smart. And of course, she sold them a lie. It was Toto the dog who revealed that there is no wizardry by going to the edge of the you'll remember the scene, I'm sure of it. The dog went to the edge of the scene and pulled the curtain across to reveal the wizard as an ordinary man, just manipulating levers. And Dorothy stepped forward and she said to that man, "You're a bad man." And his response is exactly the response that institutions should be giving us. His response was to say, "No, I'm not a bad man. I'm just not a very good wizard." Well, the institutions are not wizards. They do not hold the secrets to our good life. Because the secret to a good life is not found in the marketplace or in the world of the institution, but in the world of community. And it is only 2 door knocks away. Our challenge is to figure out how to knock on those doors in a way that includes everybody, in a way that actually brings people who are at the edge to the center. You see, in the final analysis, this wonderful movement that you are stewarding towards people-powered change is a revolution, which will only reach its full potential when people who have been defined as the problem secure the power to redefine the problem. So I say to you, on with the revolution.